Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez stood at the main gate of Camp Pendleton, her desert camouflage uniform crisp despite the California heat beating down on the security checkpoint. At 28, she had already served 2 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq, but you wouldn't know it from the way her fellow Marines treated her these days. To them, she was just the woman who got stuck with gate duty while the real soldiers did the important work. The morning started like any other. Cars lined up in the blazing sun, their engines running as drivers waited to show their identification cards. Maria checked each ID with the same attention to detail she had used when clearing buildings in Kandahar, but her colleagues saw it differently. They saw a woman who was too slow, too careful, too worried about following every single rule. "Rodriguez, you're backing up traffic again," called out Corporal Jake Matthews from the guard shack. He was 22 years old and had never left the United States, but somehow he felt qualified to criticize someone with 3 combat deployments. "Just wave them through. It's not rocket science." Maria kept her eyes on the military ID she was examining. The photo looked recent, but something about the card seemed off. The edges were slightly worn in a way that suggested frequent handling, but the lamination looked too new. She had learned to trust these instincts in places where the wrong decision could mean an improvised explosive device rolling through the front gate. "This will just take a second," she replied, turning the card over to examine the magnetic strip. It was faded, almost illegible. In Afghanistan, fake IDs were common among insurgents trying to infiltrate military bases. She knew the signs. "Come on, Rodriguez," Matthews groaned. "You're not in Afghanistan anymore. This is California. That's probably just some colonel's kid coming home from college." The driver of the car, a young man in his early 20s, smiled nervously. "Is there a problem, Sergeant?" Maria looked at him carefully. He was wearing civilian clothes, his hair was the right length for military regulations, and he spoke with confidence. But the ID bothered her. She had seen too many good soldiers die because someone didn't take the time to ask the right questions. "I need to verify this ID, sir. It'll just take a moment." She walked to the guard shack where Matthews was leaning back in his chair, feet up on the desk. Behind him, 2 other Marines were laughing at something on a phone screen. When Maria entered, the laughter died down. "Let me guess," said Private First Class Tommy Chen, barely looking up from his phone. "Rodriguez found another dangerous terrorist trying to get onto base." The other Marines chuckled. Maria had heard this joke before. Ever since she had been transferred to gate duty 6 months ago, her reputation for being thorough had become a running gag. They called her Triple Check Rodriguez because she actually followed the security protocols that everyone else ignored. What they didn't know, because she had never told them, was why she followed those protocols so carefully. They didn't know about the morning in Helmand Province when she had been manning a checkpoint, and a local Afghan had approached with what looked like a legitimate work permit. Something had seemed wrong, but her commanding officer had told her to hurry up and wave the man through. 20 minutes later, that same man had detonated a suicide vest near the motor pool, killing 3 Marines and wounding 7 others. Maria had never forgiven herself for not trusting her instincts that day. She had vowed that she would never again let someone pressure her into cutting corners when it came to security. "I need to run this ID through the system," she told Matthews. "Something's not right about it." Matthews sighed dramatically and swung his feet off the desk. "Fine, but make it quick. You're already the slowest gate guard we've ever had." Maria typed the ID number into the computer system and waited. The other Marines went back to their phones and their jokes. She could hear them talking about their weekend plans, about girls they were dating, about the new Call of Duty game that was coming out. Normal conversations for young men who had never seen combat. Sometimes Maria envied them. Sometimes she wished she could go back to being young and careless, to thinking that war was like a video game where you could just respawn if something went wrong. but that innocence had been burned out of her in the mountains of Afghanistan. The computer screen flashed red. Invalid ID. The number didn't match any personnel records in the system. Maria's heart rate quickened, but her expression remained calm. This was exactly the kind of situation she had been trained for. She picked up the phone and called the military police. "We've got a potential security breach at the main gate," she said quietly. "Need backup for ID verification." Within 3 minutes, 2 MP vehicles were at the gate. The young man with the fake ID tried to run but was tackled in the parking lot before he made it 50 feet. When they searched his car, they found detailed maps of the base, photographs of key buildings, and what appeared to be surveillance notes. The MPs later discovered he was a local college student who had been hired by a foreign intelligence service to gather information about base security procedures. He wasn't a terrorist, but he was definitely a spy. The incident should have been a victory for Maria. Her careful attention to detail had potentially saved lives and protected classified information, but that's not how her fellow Marines saw it. "Great job, Rodriguez," Matthews said sarcastically as they watched the MPs drive away with the suspect. "You caught a college kid with a fake ID. Real dangerous stuff." "He was conducting surveillance," Maria replied. "Those photos he had could have been used to plan an attack. Or maybe he was just some weird kid who likes taking pictures of buildings," Chen added. "You turned a minor security violation into a federal case." Maria wanted to explain that minor security violations were often the first sign of major threats. She wanted to tell them about the night in Iraq when a seemingly harmless local contractor had turned out to be placing tracking devices on military vehicles. She wanted to make them understand that the price of being wrong about security was measured in body bags. But she knew they wouldn't listen. To them, she was just a paranoid woman who couldn't handle the relaxed atmosphere of stateside duty. The story spread quickly through the base. By the end of the day, Maria had become known as the Marine who treated every college kid like a terrorist. The story got bigger and more ridiculous with each telling. Some versions had her drawing her weapon on an innocent civilian. Others claimed she had called in an airstrike on a car full of tourists. None of the stories mentioned that she had correctly identified a genuine security threat. None of them talked about her 3 combat deployments or her Bronze Star for valor. They just focused on the fact that she was different, that she took things too seriously, that she didn't fit in with the relaxed culture of peacetime military service. The harassment got worse over the following weeks. Someone started leaving fake parking tickets on her car with messages like, "Cited for excessive paranoia." Others would walk past the gate and make exaggerated shows of checking their IDs multiple times, mocking her thoroughness. The breaking point came on a Friday afternoon in late July. Maria was working the evening shift when a group of off-duty Marines approached the gate. They had been drinking at a bar in town and were coming back to base louder and more obnoxious than usual. "Oh, look!" one of them called out loudly. "It's Rodriguez! Better hide your IDs, guys. She might think we're enemy spies." They all started laughing and stumbling around, pretending to be suspicious characters. One of them pulled out his wallet and waved his ID in the air like a flag. "This is my real ID, Sergeant," he shouted in a fake foreign accent. "I am definitely not a terrorist. Please don't call the FBI on me." Maria tried to ignore them, but they kept getting louder and more aggressive. Other Marines started to gather, drawn by the noise and the promise of entertainment. Soon there was a crowd of about 20 people watching the show. "You know what Rodriguez's problem is?" the drunk Marine continued, now addressing the crowd like he was giving a speech. "She thinks she's still in Afghanistan. She can't figure out that the war is over." The crowd laughed. Someone else shouted out, "Maybe we should transfer her to airport security. She'd love checking IDs all day." "Or we could stick her at the gate permanently," another voice added. "Keep her where she can't do any real damage." That last comment hit harder than the others. Maria had been wondering for months why she had been transferred from her previous position in intelligence to gate duty. She had assumed it was just a routine rotation, but now she was starting to suspect there was more to it. Had someone decided she was a liability? Had her commanding officers grown tired of her careful approach to security? Had they stuck her at the gate as a way to get her out of the way? The drunk Marine was still performing for the crowd, but his jokes were getting meaner. "You know what we should call this gate?" he announced. "Rodriguez's last stand. Where paranoid Marines go to retire." The laughter was getting louder, more cruel. Maria could see people taking pictures with their phones, probably planning to share the humiliation on social media. She wanted to walk away, but she was on duty. She had to stay at her post. That's when she noticed a black sedan approaching the gate. It was moving slowly, deliberately, like the driver was taking time to observe the scene. The windows were tinted dark enough that she couldn't see inside, but something about the vehicle made her forget about the harassment for a moment. The car stopped at the checkpoint, but the driver didn't immediately roll down the window. Instead, the engine idled quietly, while the drunk Marines continued their show behind her. Maria approached the vehicle professionally, the way she had been trained to do thousands of times before. The harassment and the laughter faded into background noise as her focus shifted to the job at hand. The window rolled down slowly, revealing a man in his mid-40s wearing civilian clothes. He had the bearing of a career military officer, even without a uniform. His eyes were sharp and alert, scanning the scene behind her with the kind of situational awareness that only came from years of combat experience. "Good evening, sir," Maria said, maintaining her professional demeanor despite the chaos behind her. "I'll need to see your identification, please." The man handed over his ID without speaking. Maria examined it carefully, noting the military clearance levels and access codes. This was a high-ranking officer, someone important enough to have unrestricted access to the base. But she followed her procedures anyway, checking the photo against the man's face and verifying the ID numbers in the computer system. Behind her, she could hear the drunk Marines still laughing and making jokes, probably wondering why she was taking so long with what was obviously a legitimate military ID. The computer confirmed what she already knew. The ID was genuine, and it belonged to someone with very high clearance levels. She handed it back to the driver. "Thank you, sir. Welcome to Camp Pendleton." The man took his ID but didn't drive away immediately. Instead, he looked past her toward the crowd of Marines who were still making jokes at her expense. "Sergeant," he said quietly, "how long has this been going on?" Maria was surprised by the question. Most officers pretended not to notice when enlisted personnel were giving each other a hard time. It was considered part of military culture, a way for young Marines to blow off steam. "It's nothing I can't handle, sir," she replied. The man studied her face for a moment as if he was making some kind of decision. "What's your name, Sergeant?" "Rodriguez, sir. Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez." He nodded slowly. "Thank you, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. You're doing good work here." Then he drove through the gate and disappeared into the base, leaving Maria standing there wondering why a high-ranking officer had bothered to ask about her situation. Behind her, the crowd of Marines was finally starting to break up. The drunk ones were being led away by their friends, and the entertainment was over. But the damage was done. The humiliation would be talked about for weeks, shared on social media, turned into another story about Rodriguez, the paranoid gate guard. As Maria returned to her post, she couldn't shake the feeling that the interaction with the mysterious officer had been significant somehow. There had been something about his manner, about the way he had asked his questions, that suggested he was more than just a passing observer. She tried to put the incident out of her mind and focus on her duties, but the man's final words kept echoing in her head. "You're doing good work here." It was the first time in months that anyone had acknowledged her service in a positive way. The rest of the shift passed quietly. The base settled into its evening routine, and the traffic at the gate slowed to a trickle. Maria processed each vehicle with the same careful attention to detail that had made her a target for harassment, but she found herself thinking about the officer's words. Maybe someone had noticed her dedication after all. Maybe someone understood that her careful approach to security wasn't paranoia, but professionalism. Maybe there was still a place in the military for people who took their responsibilities seriously. As her shift ended and her replacement arrived, Maria walked back to her barracks wondering if things might finally start to change. She had no way of knowing that the man in the black sedan was about to turn her entire world upside down. She had no idea that within 24 hours, her name would be known throughout the entire base for reasons she could never have imagined. And she certainly couldn't have predicted that her moment of professional humiliation would soon become the beginning of the most important recognition of her military career. The next morning brought news that Maria Rodriguez had not expected. She was sitting in the mess hall, eating breakfast alone as usual, when Gunnery Sergeant Williams approached her table. Williams was her direct supervisor, a 20-year veteran who had always been fair but distant in his dealings with her. "Rodriguez," he said, sitting down across from her. "We need to talk." Maria set down her fork and straightened up. In her experience, conversations that started this way rarely ended well. "Yes, Gunny." Williams looked around the mess hall, making sure no one was close enough to overhear. "There's going to be a base inspection next week. High-level stuff. Navy SEALs, Marine Force Recon, some Pentagon officials. They're evaluating our security procedures." Maria nodded. Base inspections were routine, though having SEALs involved suggested this one was more serious than usual. "Here's the thing," Williams continued. "Colonel Henderson wants you running the main gate during the inspection, full responsibility for all entry security." This was unexpected. Maria had assumed that for something this important, they would put Matthews or one of the other male Marines in charge. She was just the paranoid woman they had stuck at the gate to keep her out of the way. "May I ask why, Gunny?" Williams smiled slightly. "Apparently word got up the chain of command about that spy you caught last month. Some people in high places were impressed by your attention to detail." Maria felt a surge of satisfaction. Someone had noticed her work after all, but Williams's expression suggested there was more to the story. "However," he continued, "there are also some concerns about your methods. Some people think you might be too aggressive in your security procedures. They're worried you might embarrass the base in front of the inspection team." And there it was. They wanted her expertise, but they were afraid of her thoroughness. They wanted her to catch real threats, but ignore anything that might slow down the process or make important people uncomfortable. "What exactly are they asking me to do, Gunny?" "Be professional, be thorough, but don't create any incidents. These are important people, Rodriguez. Some of them have higher clearances than our base commander. We can't have you treating Navy SEALs like potential terrorists." Maria understood the impossible position they were putting her in. They wanted her to maintain security without actually securing anything. They wanted her to look professional while not doing her job properly. "I understand, Gunny. I'll handle it appropriately." Williams studied her face, trying to determine if she was being sincere or just telling him what he wanted to hear. "I hope so, Rodriguez. Because if anything goes wrong during this inspection, it's going to fall on you." After he left, Maria sat alone with her breakfast, thinking about the impossible situation she was facing. Over the past 6 months, she had learned that the military she had joined was different from the one she was serving in now. When she had enlisted 8 years ago, she had believed that competence and dedication were valued above all else. She had thought that doing your job well was the most important thing, but peacetime military service operated by different rules. Here, fitting in was more important than standing out. Going along with the group was valued more than individual excellence, and being liked was more crucial than being respected. Maria had never been good at any of those things. She didn't know how to pretend that security wasn't important. She couldn't fake casual indifference to procedures that were written in the blood of dead soldiers, and she refused to compromise her standards just to make other people comfortable. The week leading up to the inspection was tense. Maria found herself being watched constantly by her supervisors, who seemed to be waiting for her to do something that would justify their concerns. Every ID check took a little longer than usual because she could feel eyes on her, evaluating her every move. The harassment from her fellow Marines had died down somewhat since news of her role in the inspection had spread. They weren't sure what to make of the fact that the brass had chosen her for such an important assignment. Some seemed to think it proved she had been right all along. Others believed it was just political correctness, giving a woman a high-profile role to look good for the visitors. Maria tried to ignore all of it and focus on preparing for the inspection. She studied the security protocols until she had memorized every detail. She practiced ID verification procedures until she could spot a fake from across the room. She prepared herself for the most important security assignment of her career. 3 days before the inspection, she received an unexpected visitor at the gate. It was late afternoon, and traffic was light when a familiar black sedan pulled up to her checkpoint, the same car she had processed the night of her humiliation, driven by the same mysterious officer. This time, when the window rolled down, the man was wearing a military uniform. Maria could see his rank insignia clearly now, and what she saw made her heart skip a beat. This was a Navy commander, someone far more senior than anyone she usually dealt with at the gate. "Good afternoon, Commander," she said, snapping to attention. "Good afternoon, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez." He handed her his ID, but his eyes were studying her face carefully. "I understand you're going to be handling security for our visit next week." "Yes, sir. I'm honored to be given the responsibility." The commander nodded. "I've been reading your service record, Sergeant. 3 combat deployments, Bronze Star for Valor, expert marksmanship qualification. Impressive background for someone who ended up on gate duty." Maria wasn't sure how to respond to that. She had wondered for months how someone with her qualifications had ended up in her current position, but no one had ever explained it to her. "I serve where I'm needed, sir." "Yes, you do." The commander took back his ID but didn't drive away. Instead, he seemed to be considering something. "Tell me about Afghanistan, Sergeant. What was your role there?" This was unusual. Officers rarely asked enlisted personnel about their combat experiences, especially not during routine gate interactions. But something about the commander's manner made Maria feel like this wasn't routine at all. "I was attached to intelligence units, sir, mostly working with local populations gathering information about insurgent activities." "Dangerous work." "Yes, sir, but necessary work." The commander studied her for another moment. "What's the most important thing you learned over there?" Maria thought about the question seriously. There were many things she could say about Afghanistan. She could talk about the importance of cultural sensitivity, or the value of building relationships with local allies, or the complexity of fighting an enemy who looked like everyone else. But what came to mind was something more basic, something that had shaped every decision she had made since coming home. "That details matter, sir. The smallest oversight can get people killed. A fake ID, a missed checkpoint, a procedure that gets skipped because it's inconvenient. Over there, I saw what happened when people didn't pay attention to the small things." The commander nodded slowly. "And you've carried that lesson home with you?" "Yes, sir. Some people think it makes me paranoid. They think I'm too careful, too suspicious. But I'd rather be wrong about being careful than wrong about being careless." "Even when it makes you unpopular?" Maria hesitated. This was getting into territory that could be dangerous for her career. Criticizing her fellow Marines to a senior officer was not a smart move, but something about the commander's manner made her feel like honesty was more important than politics. "Sir, I've been unpopular since the day I started taking security seriously." But I'd rather be unpopular and alive than well-liked and dead. The commander smiled at that, the first time she had seen any emotion on his face. Good answer, Sergeant. I'll see you next week. He drove away, leaving Maria wondering what that conversation had been about. It felt like she had been tested somehow, but she wasn't sure what the test was, or whether she had passed it. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation and anxiety. Maria double-checked every piece of equipment at the gate, reviewed security protocols one more time, and tried to prepare herself for whatever the inspection might bring. She had no way of knowing that the inspection team had already been observing her for weeks, or that her performance was being evaluated by people far more important than she realized. The night before the inspection, she couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow barracks bed, staring at the ceiling and thinking about all the ways things could go wrong. She could be too slow and hold up important visitors. She could be too thorough and offend someone with high clearance. She could miss something important and compromise base security. But worst of all, she could prove her critics right. She could demonstrate that she really was just a paranoid woman who didn't belong in a position of responsibility. She could confirm every negative thing that had been said about her over the past 6 months. At 3 in the morning, she gave up on sleep and went for a run around the base. The exercise helped calm her nerves, but it also gave her time to think about why this assignment mattered so much to her. It wasn't just about proving her critics wrong, though that was certainly part of it. It was about proving to herself that she still had value as a Marine. Over the past 6 months, she had started to wonder if her combat experience was just a burden now, if her skills were obsolete in peacetime. She had begun to question whether there was still a place in the military for people like her. This inspection was her chance to show that her experience and her approach to security were still valuable. It was an opportunity to demonstrate that her careful attention to detail wasn't paranoia, but professionalism. As the sun came up, Maria returned to her barracks and prepared for what she knew would be the most important day of her military career. She had no idea that by the end of the day, everything she thought she knew about her situation would be turned upside down. She had no way of knowing that the mysterious commander she had met twice was not just a random observer, but the leader of the inspection team. She couldn't have guessed that her performance over the past 6 months had been carefully watched by people at the highest levels of the military. And she certainly couldn't have predicted that her moment of truth was about to arrive in a way that would shock everyone who had ever doubted her abilities. The inspection team was scheduled to arrive at 800 hours. At 07:30, Maria took her position at the main gate, wearing her dress uniform and carrying herself with the bearing of a combat veteran. She had reviewed every protocol, checked every piece of equipment, and prepared herself for anything. What she wasn't prepared for was the convoy of black vehicles that approached the gate at exactly 0800. There were 6 cars in total, each one carrying officials whose clearance levels were higher than most people on the base would ever see. But it was the lead vehicle that caught her attention. It was the same black sedan she had processed twice before, driven by the same Navy commander who had asked her about her service in Afghanistan. As the convoy approached, Maria realized that this was no ordinary inspection. The man she had been talking to was not just a random officer passing through. He was the person in charge of evaluating everything she did, and he had been watching her for much longer than she had ever suspected. The convoy of black vehicles came to a stop at Maria Rodriguez's checkpoint with military precision. She could feel the weight of dozens of eyes watching her from behind tinted windows, evaluating her every move. This was the moment she had been preparing for, the test that would determine whether her career would continue or end in disgrace. The lead vehicle's window rolled down, revealing the familiar face of the Navy commander she had encountered twice before. But now she could see his full uniform, and what she saw made her breath catch in her throat. This wasn't just any Navy commander. The insignia on his chest told a story that made Maria's heart race with recognition. Special warfare insignia, SEAL trident, combat ribbons that spoke of operations in places most people couldn't pronounce. This was a Navy SEAL commander, someone whose reputation was built on the most dangerous missions the military had to offer. "Good morning, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had led men into battle. "I'm Commander Michael Thompson, United States Navy SEALs. I'm here to conduct a security assessment of this facility." Maria snapped to attention with parade ground precision. "Good morning, Commander Thompson. Welcome to Camp Pendleton. I'll need to see identification from all personnel in your convoy." Behind her, she could hear her fellow Marines gathering. Word had spread quickly that the inspection team had arrived, and everyone wanted to see how Rodriguez would handle the pressure. She could feel Corporal Matthews and Private Chen watching, probably waiting for her to make a mistake that would confirm all their criticisms. Commander Thompson handed over his identification, along with a folder containing credentials for his entire team. Maria took the documents and began examining them with the same careful attention to detail that had made her a target for harassment. She checked each ID against the computer system, verified clearance levels, and cross-referenced names with the expected visitor list. It took her nearly 10 minutes to process the entire convoy, far longer than a casual gate guard would have taken. She could sense the impatience building among the observers behind her, could almost hear them thinking about how embarrassing it was to have important visitors delayed by Rodriguez's excessive paranoia. But Commander Thompson waited patiently, watching her work with an expression that revealed nothing. When she finally returned his paperwork, he studied her face for a moment before speaking. "Thank you, Staff Sergeant. That was very thorough." "Yes, sir. Security is our top priority." The commander nodded. "I'd like to speak with you after we complete our assessment. Would that be possible?" "Of course, sir. I'll be here until 1600 hours. The convoy proceeded through the gate, leaving Maria alone with her racing thoughts. She had no idea what Commander Thompson wanted to discuss, but his manner had been different this time, more formal, more official. It felt like something important was about to happen. The rest of the morning passed slowly. Maria processed routine traffic while trying not to think about the inspection team's presence on the base. She could see them occasionally, moving from building to building in their black vehicles, conducting whatever assessment had brought them to Camp Pendleton. At noon, Gunnery Sergeant Williams appeared at the gate with an expression Maria had never seen before. He looked nervous, almost intimidated, which was unusual for a man who had served in combat zones around the world. "Rodriguez," he said quietly, "you need to come with me. The inspection team wants to see you." Maria felt her stomach drop. "Did I do something wrong, Gunny?" "I don't know. They just said they wanted to speak with you immediately." She followed Williams to the base headquarters building, where the inspection team had set up their temporary operations center. The hallways were filled with personnel she didn't recognize, all wearing the kind of serious expressions that suggested this was more than a routine assessment. Williams led her to a conference room where Commander Thompson was waiting along with several other officers she didn't recognize. Their uniforms told stories of special operations units, intelligence agencies, and combat commands that operated at the highest levels of the military. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," Commander Thompson said, gesturing for her to take a seat. "Thank you for joining us." Maria sat down, trying to maintain her composure despite the intimidating array of senior officers around the table. She noticed that one of them was a Marine colonel, someone senior enough to end her career with a word. "Staff Sergeant," Commander Thompson continued, "we're here today because of you." This was not what Maria had expected to hear. "Sir?" The commander opened a thick folder and spread several documents across the table. Maria could see photographs, computer printouts, and what looked like surveillance reports. "6 months ago, you were transferred from intelligence duties to gate security. Do you know why? Maria had wondered about this for months, but no one had ever given her a clear answer. I assumed it was a routine rotation, sir. It wasn't. Commander Thompson pointed to one of the documents. You were transferred because someone in your chain of command believed you were too aggressive in your security procedures. There were complaints that you were too suspicious, too thorough, too unwilling to compromise on protocols. Maria felt her heart sinking. So her worst fears had been confirmed. She had been moved to gate duty because her superiors thought she was a problem. But Commander Thompson wasn't finished. What your commanding officers didn't know was that we had been watching you. For the past 8 months, our counterintelligence people have been aware of potential security threats to this base. We needed someone in a position to observe and assess those threats. He pointed to another document, this one showing surveillance photographs of the young man Maria had detained with the fake ID. This individual had been under investigation for 6 weeks before he attempted to enter the base. We knew he was coming, and we needed to see how your security procedures would handle a real threat. Maria stared at the photographs, trying to process what she was hearing. You were testing our security? We were testing your security, Staff Sergeant. Specifically, we were testing you. Commander Thompson leaned forward, his expression serious. What we discovered was that you were the only person on this base who consistently followed proper security protocols. While your colleagues were cutting corners and ignoring procedures, you were doing exactly what a professional Marine should do. Another officer, the Marine Colonel, spoke up. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, you need to understand something. The harassment you've been receiving, the criticism about your methods, the jokes about your thoroughness, all of that was noted in our assessment. Maria didn't know what to say. She had thought her careful approach to security was causing problems for her career. She had never imagined that it was being evaluated by people at this level. Commander Thompson opened another folder. Your service record shows 3 combat deployments, a Bronze Star for Valor, and consistently high performance evaluations. But what impressed us most was your performance here, under circumstances that would have caused most people to compromise their standards. He pulled out what looked like a commendation certificate. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, it is my honor to inform you that you are being awarded the Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal for exceptional performance of duty in a sensitive security assignment. Maria stared at the certificate, unable to believe what she was hearing. She had expected to be criticized for being too careful. Instead, she was being honored for the very qualities that had made her unpopular with her peers. But Commander Thompson wasn't finished. There's more, Staff Sergeant. Based on our assessment of your performance and your qualifications, you're being recommended for transfer to a special security detail. You'll be working directly with Navy SEAL teams and Marine Force reconnaissance units, providing security assessment for sensitive operations. The room fell silent as the implications of this announcement sank in. Maria was being offered the kind of assignment that most Marines could only dream about. She was being recognized not despite her careful approach to security, but because of it. Sir, she managed to say, I don't know what to say. Say yes, the Marine Colonel interjected with a smile. Because this is an opportunity that doesn't come along often. Commander Thompson stood up, and everyone else in the room followed suit. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, there's one more thing. I want you to know that your performance over the past 6 months has been exemplary. You maintained your professional standards despite significant pressure to compromise them. You did your job correctly, even when it made you unpopular. That's exactly the kind of integrity we need in special operations security. He extended his hand to her. It's been an honor to observe your work, Staff Sergeant. As Maria shook hands with the SEAL commander, she felt 6 months of doubt and frustration lifting from her shoulders. She had been right all along. Her careful attention to security protocols, her refusal to cut corners, her unwillingness to compromise her standards, all of it had been correct. The meeting broke up with handshakes and congratulations from officers who, just an hour ago, she had never met. As she walked back toward the gate to complete her shift, Maria felt like she was walking in a dream. When she arrived back at the checkpoint, she found a crowd of Marines waiting for her. Word had already spread about her meeting with the inspection team, though the details were still unclear. Corporal Matthews and Private Chen were in the crowd, along with Gunnery Sergeant Williams and dozens of other personnel. The atmosphere was different now. Instead of mockery and harassment, she could see curiosity and something that might have been respect. These were the same people who had made jokes about her paranoia and criticized her thoroughness. But now they were looking at her with new eyes. Commander Thompson's convoy was preparing to leave the base, and the lead vehicle stopped at Maria's checkpoint one final time. The window rolled down, and the SEAL commander looked out at the crowd of Marines who had gathered to watch. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "I want you to know that Staff Sergeant Rodriguez represents the highest standards of military professionalism. Her dedication to security protocols and her unwillingness to compromise on procedures make her a credit to the Marine Corps and to this base." He looked directly at Maria. "Staff Sergeant, thank you for your service. Your new assignment begins Monday morning." As the convoy drove away, Maria found herself surrounded by Marines who suddenly wanted to shake her hand and congratulate her. The same people who had been making jokes about her paranoia were now praising her dedication. The transformation was almost surreal. Corporal Matthews approached her with an expression she had never seen before, something that looked like embarrassment mixed with respect. "Rodriguez," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. We all do. We didn't understand what you were doing." Maria looked at him and saw something she recognized from her combat deployments, the look of a young soldier who had just learned an important lesson about the difference between playing at war and preparing for it. "Don't worry about it, Matthews," she said. "Just remember that procedures exist for a reason. They're written in the blood of people who learned the hard way what happens when you don't follow them." As her shift ended and she prepared to leave the gate for the last time, Maria reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she had been transferred to gate duty as a way to get her out of the way. Her superiors had seen her careful approach to security as a liability, something that needed to be contained. But what they had seen as excessive caution, the SEAL commander had recognized as professional competence. What her peers had mocked as paranoia, special operations personnel had valued as vigilance. Her unwillingness to compromise on security had made her unpopular with people who didn't understand the stakes, but it had impressed people who did. The harassment and criticism had been difficult, but it had also been a test. Not the kind of test her tormentors had intended, but a test nonetheless. And she had passed it by refusing to change who she was to make other people comfortable. As she walked back to her barracks that evening, Maria thought about the young Marines who would take her place at the gate. She hoped they would remember her story and understand that being professional wasn't the same as being popular. She hoped they would learn that doing the right thing was more important than fitting in. Most importantly, she hoped they would understand that in the military, attention to detail wasn't just about following rules. It was about bringing everyone home alive. Her new assignment would begin Monday morning, working with the most elite units in the military. She would be part of teams that operated in the most dangerous places on Earth, where the stakes were measured in lives and the margin for error was zero. It was exactly where she belonged, and exactly where her careful, thorough, uncompromising approach to security would be not just appreciated, but essential. The Marines who had mocked her for being too careful would continue their careers never knowing how close they had come to learning the hard way why procedures matter. But Maria Rodriguez would carry that knowledge with her to places where lives depended on getting every detail right, and she was ready for it.